All right, so ready to dive deep into the world of mobile operating systems?
Always up for a deep dive, especially when it comes to tech.
Awesome. Today we're going way beyond your usual iOS and Android.
Oh, intriguing. So we're talking about the lesser-known players in the mobile OS landscape.
You got it. We're on a quest to uncover those hidden gems, the underdogs, the ones that make you go, wait, there's an operating system for that.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget just how much we rely on these operating systems without really thinking about what they are or how they work.
Totally. And to guide us on this journey, we've got this treasure trove of information, this Wikipedia article that's packed with mobile OS history. It's really fascinating stuff.
A deep dive into the history of mobile operating systems sounds like a plan. I'm ready to unearth some of those forgotten gems.
Perfect. Because I was blown away by what I found digging through this Wikipedia article. It's got a timeline that goes way back, even before what we'd even consider a smartphone.
Wow, really? So we're talking pre-iPhone, pre-BlackBerry even.
Oh yeah, way back. Speaking of which, did you know that the first true smartphone actually popped up all the way back in 1994?
1994. Wow, that's before I even had a cell phone. What was this ancient artifact?
Get this, it was the IBM Simon.
The IBM Simon. Okay, that rings a very faint bell. Vaguely.
It was clunky as heck by today's standards, but for its time, it was revolutionary.
What kind of groundbreaking features did it have back then? A calculator? Snake.
Way more advanced. It had a touch screen.
A touchscreen. In 1994. Get out of here.
I know, right? It also had email capabilities and even those PDA functions that everyone was obsessed with back then.
You're blowing my mind right now. It really set the stage for the smartphone revolution that was to come.
Totally. It's wild to think we went from that brick to the sleek, foldable phones we have now.
And foldable phones are just the tip of the iceberg. It's not just the hardware that's evolved. The variety of operating systems out there is mind-boggling.
You're telling me? I mean, yeah, we've got Android and iOS dominating the scene.
The reigning champions of the mobile OS world.
For sure.
Yeah.
But there's a whole universe of other players out there, some even building upon Android in some really innovative ways.
You've got my attention. Tell me more about these Android spin-offs.
All right, so picture this. You've got Amazon, they've got their Kindle Fire tablets, right?
Right, and they're pretty popular.
Exactly. What a lot of people don't realize is those run on something called Fire OS. And Fire OS, it's actually built on Android.
Wait, really? I had no idea.
Yeah, but Amazon has customized it so heavily to focus on their content, their services, it's almost unrecognizable as an Android device.
Wow, talk about a walled garden. So it's like Android, but with an Amazon Prime membership built in.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. It's not just about companies tweaking things for their own ecosystems either. We even see operating systems popping up in specific countries and regions.
Oh, that's interesting. Designed for specific markets and their needs.
You got it. Like, there's one called Baros in India that's specifically designed with their unique needs and preferences in mind.
That makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Catering to specific languages, cultural nuances, maybe even regulations. It's a smart strategy.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, you've got the whole open source movement, which throws another wrench into the mix.
Open source operating systems. Now that's something I'm really interested in. Tell me more.
All right, so these are operating systems built on collaboration, shared code, the whole shebang. You've got Lineage OS, for example, which is a really cool one.
Lineage OS, that name rings a bell.
It picked up where the legendary Cyanogen mod left off. It's a fantastic option for folks who like to tinker, you know?
Ah, so for the more tech-savvy user who wants more control over their device.
Exactly, and for breathing new life into older phones. But for those who are really serious about control and pushing those boundaries, there's Pure OS.
Pure OS, I'm not familiar with that one. What's their deal?
They are laser focused on privacy and security. Like, we're talking hardcore privacy advocates here. They even go as far as incorporating hardware kill switches for your camera and microphone.
No way. That's next level. Hardware kill switches? That's serious dedication to privacy.
Tell me about it. It's pretty impressive. But with all this variety, all these different operating systems vying for a place in our pockets, I gotta ask, what does the market share look like?
That's the million-dollar question. With all these players on the field, who's winning the mobile OS game?
Right. I mean, we hear about Android and iOS all the time, but are they really the titans everyone says they are?
They're definitely the heavyweights in the ring, that's for...
Okay, so the rumors are true.
Oh, yeah. But it's interesting to look at how those numbers are constantly shifting, even if slightly. And you know what's really fascinating?
What's that?
Globally, smartphone use has actually surpassed desktop use.
Wow, that is pretty incredible when you think about it. But it makes sense. Everyone's glued to their phones these days.
Exactly. Smartphones had become our primary portal to the digital world.
For sure. And diving into this Wikipedia article really made me appreciate how far these mobile operating systems have come. We've gone from like really basic call and text
In the
functions,
day when phones were just phones.
right, to these incredibly powerful computers we carry in our pockets. It's pretty amazing.
It really is. And speaking of back in the day, this Wikipedia article has some real gems from the early days of mobile OS history.
Oh, like what?
Well, did you know that in 1993, Penpoint OS was released? It was for the AT&T EO personal communicator.
I vaguely remember those. Weren't they those big clunky things?
Oh, yeah. And that same year, we saw Apple's Newton OS hit the scene on their Newton series of PDAs.
Ah, the Newton.
Yeah.
Apple's early attempt to revolutionize mobile computing.
Exactly. It was a time of experimentation, with companies trying to figure out what this whole mobile computing thing was all about.
It was the Wild West out there. But then in August of 94, along came the IBM Simon, like we talked about earlier. The OG smartphone,
The one with the touch screen and
the
everything.
one and only. And that really changed the game.
It's amazing to think about how influential that one device was.
It really was. And then just a year later, in 96, we saw the release of the Palm Pilot. Remember those?
How could I forget? The Palm Pilot was huge. It was the go-to device for anyone who wanted to stay organized on the go.
Right. It ran Palm OS, which became a major player in the early smartphone world.
It really did. And that same year, Nokia, who would later become a dominant force in the mobile phone market, released the Nokia 9000 communicator.
The Nokia 9000 communicator. Now that's a blast from the past. It was like a mini laptop.
It was. It ran on the Pengios 3.0 OS.
So 1996 was a pretty big year for mobile, huh?
A pivotal year for sure. And the innovation didn't stop there. Just a year later, in 1997, we saw the emergence of EPO-C32 on the Scion Series 5 PDA.
Xeon. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Right. They were pretty innovative for their time. EPO-C32 eventually evolved into the Symbian OS, which ended up being a major player in the mobile world.
Symbian, another blast from the past. I remember those Nokia phones running Symbian.
Oh, absolutely. Nokia and Symbian, they were like the dynamic duo for a while there. But in 1998, things started heating up even more when Scion, Ericsson, Motorola, and Nokia came together.
Wait, they teamed up? That's a pretty big deal. Why'd they do that?
They joined forces to create Symbian Ltd, with the goal of making Symbian the dominant force in the smartphone OS market.
Wow. Talk about an ambitious goal. So did they succeed?
For a while there, they weren't far off. Symbian ended up powering a lot of major mobile phone brands, especially Nokia. Remember those iconic Nokia phones with the little joysticks?
Oh, I remember those. They were everywhere.
Those were Symbian through and through, is the operating system to have for a good while.
So what happened? Why did Symbian eventually fade away?
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
But first, let's talk about another big player that entered the scene in June of '99, Qualcomm.
Qualcomm. They're still around today making chips for a lot of smartphones.
Exactly. But back then, they were making waves with their PDQ smartphone, the first one to be powered by Palm OS.
Palm OS was on fire back then. It seemed like everyone was using it.
They were a force to be reckoned with. And that same year, Nokia released the Nokia 7110, which introduced the world to two game-changing features. T9, predictive text input,
T9, the OG autocorrect.
and a wireless application protocol browser.
Whoa. So people were browsing the web on their phones back then. What was that even like?
Oh, it was a very different experience back then. Imagine tiny screens, slow connections, websites that weren't designed for mobile.
I can only imagine.
But it's a sign of things to come. The mobile internet was starting to take shape.
That's so cool. So we've got IBM, Palm, Nokia, Qualcomm. Anyone else join the party in the late 90s?
Oh, yeah. In the year 2000, Ericsson released the R380, which ran on EPO-C32 Release 5. This is significant because it was one of the first phones to use what we now know as Symbian OS.
Right. Symbian was becoming a pretty big deal around that time.
It was. And in June 2001, Nokia really stepped into the spotlight, launching their Symbian Series 80 platform on the Nokia 92 BISO communicator.
Another Nokia. They were really pumping out the phones back then.
They were on a roll. And the 9210 was a big deal because it was the first time an OS was officially branded as Symbian. Plus, it was the first to allow users to install additional software on their phones.
Wait, so you're telling me that before that you couldn't even install apps on your phone?
Nope. It was pretty much whatever came pre-installed, that was it.
Wow, that's crazy to think about.
I know, right? It's amazing how much things have changed. 2001 was a busy year. Qualcomm unveiled their Brew platform, which ran on their RX real-time operating system.
Brew, as in like brewing coffee.
Not quite. It stood for Binary Runtime Environment for Wireless.
Ah, okay. Makes a little more sense.
And that same year, we saw the emergence of BlackBerry, with their first smartphone running Java 2 Micro Edition.
BlackBerry. Now those, I remember very clearly.
Everyone and their mom had a BlackBerry back in the day.
It's true. What a throwback.
And of course, Microsoft, never one to be left out of the party, entered the game with their first Windows CE smartphones.
Microsoft? So they've been trying to make it in the mobile world for a long time.
Oh yeah. Longer than most people realize.
Wow, I had no idea there was so much going on in the mobile OS world back then.
Oh yeah, it was a wild time. And we're just getting started.
So 2002, more mobile OS action, right?
Oh yeah, things were really starting to heat up. Nokia, they were still riding high on the success of Symbian, and they released their Symbian Series 60 platform.
Symbian Series 60, that was a big deal, wasn't it?
Huge. It was the foundation for most of Nokia's smartphones for years, until they made the switch to Windows Phone in 2011, actually.
Windows Phone, now that's another blast from the past.
Right, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back to 2002, that was also the year we saw the introduction of UIQ.
UIQ, now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. What was that all about?
So UIQ was basically a user interface built on top of Symbian. It was first released on the Sony Ericsson P800.
Sony Ericsson, those were the days.
They made some pretty cool phones back then. And T-Mobile decided to shake things up that year, too. They launched the Danger Hip Top, running Danger OS.
The Danger Hip Top, wasn't that phone with the swivel screen?
Yeah, the one that looked like a sideways flip phone. It was a unique design, that's for sure.
It was. It seemed like everyone was trying to come up with the next big thing back then.
They were. And then in 2003, we saw the first Linux-based cell phone, the Motorola A760.
Motorola A760, that doesn't ring a bell. Was that a big deal?
It was a sign of things to come. It hinted at the growing influence of open-source software in the mobile world.
So Linux was starting to make its way into phones, even back then?
Slowly but surely. Fast forward to 2005, and Microsoft was still trying to make their mark with Windows Mobile 5.0.
Microsoft always trying to get a piece of that mobile pie.
Right, and Nokia, they were already looking beyond phones. They unveiled their Memo OS on the N770.
The N770, what was that?
It was their first attempt at an internet tablet. It had a 4.13-inch screen, which seemed massive back then.
Wow, a whole 4.13 inches? That's adorable by today's standards.
I know, right? But back then, it was huge. The N770 was definitely ahead of its time in terms of mobile internet devices.
So things were really starting to evolve quickly. It was like a whole new world of mobile computing was opening up.
It was. And then 2007,
Yeah.
everything changed.
What happened in 2007? I feel like something major happened in the tech world that year.
Well, in June of '07, Apple unveiled the iPhone.
The iPhone, that was a game changer for sure.
Talk about a revolution. The first iPhone, running what was then called iPhone OS, completely redefined what a smartphone could be.
Do you remember where you were when you first saw the iPhone?
I do. It was like something out of a science fiction movie. That sleek design, the intuitive touchscreen interface, it was like nothing we'd ever seen before.
And it sent shockwaves through the industry. Suddenly, everyone was playing catch-up.
Absolutely. That same year, Microsoft announced Windows Mobile 6.0, and Palm tried to stay relevant with the Palm Folio.
Palm Folio, wasn't that the thing that was like a laptop but smaller?
Yeah, sort of like an early attempt at a mobile companion device. It relied on a Palm Trio smartphone for connectivity.
The Palm Trio. That was a pretty sweet phone back in the day.
It was. But the Folio, it was a fascinating idea, but way ahead of its time.
It seems like every tech innovation goes through that awkward phase.
It's true. But while some companies were trying to find their footing, something much bigger was brewing.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. What was going on behind the scenes?
This was big. The Open Handset Alliance was formed, led by Google.
The Open Handset Alliance, that rings a bell. Weren't they the ones behind Android?
Bingo. This alliance brought together some of the biggest names in tech. HTC, Sony, Dell, Intel, Motorola, Samsung, LG. They were all on board.
Wow, that's a serious power team. What was their goal?
They wanted to develop an open-source mobile operating system. And that's how Android was born.
Android, the little operating system that could. It's amazing how quickly it rose to the top.
It's true. But it wasn't all smooth sailing for Android in those early days. In February 2008, the Limo Foundation, which later became the Tilson Association, launched their own mobile Linux distribution.
So Android had some competition right out of the gate.
Oh yeah, the battle for mobile OS dominance was heating up.
Huh.
And Nokia, they weren't about to go down without a fight.
How did you?
In 2008, Nokia became the sole owner of Symbian Ltd., forming the Symbian Foundation.
They were going all in on Symbian.
They were. Their goal was to coordinate the platform's future development, kind of like what the Open Handset Alliance was doing with Android.
So it was like a two-horse race at that point, Android versus Symbian.
It was shaping up to be.
Hmm.
But meanwhile, Apple was busy making mobile history. That July, they released iPhone OS 2, along with the iPhone 3G. And you know what came with that?
Let me guess. The App Store.
You got it. The App Store was a game changer. It wasn't just about downloading games. It completely transformed how we consume software and interact with our devices.
It's true. It's hard to imagine a time before app stores.
Right. But back then, it was revolutionary. And it created this whole new ecosystem for developers, leading to the app-driven world we live in today.
So what did Android do? They had to come up with something to compete.
Oh yeah, they weren't just going to sit back and watch. In October of '08, the Open Handset Alliance finally released Android 1.0.
The very first Android phone? What was it?
The T-Mobile G1.
Oh, the G1. Now, that one I remember seeing in stores. It was a little rough around the edges compared to the iPhone.
It was, but it had potential. And Nokia was still in the game. They released Symbian 1, a touch-specific platform, and their first touchscreen phone, the Nokia 5800 Express Music.
Touchscreen phones were all the rage back then.
Oh yeah. Remember those resistive screens? Where you practically had to use a stylus like a chisel to get them to respond?
I remember those days. We've come a long way with touchscreen technology.
Tell me about it. And 2009 was another whirlwind year. Intel was pushing their Moblin 2 platform for netbooks.
Netbooks, those were a thing for a while.
They were. And Palm was making a last-ditch effort to stay relevant with their new WebOS on the Palm Pre.
The Palm Pre, that was a pretty cool phone, actually. It had that cool slide-out keyboard.
It did. It was a really innovative device. Too bad it didn't catch on. And Microsoft, they were still trying to figure things out, releasing Windows Mobile 6.5 as a stopgap measure.
Windows Mobile 6.5. I vaguely remember that. Wasn't very impressive, was it?
Not really. It felt very much like a temporary solution while they worked on something bigger.
So everyone was still searching for that magic formula.
It was a wild time to be following the mobile OS world. And it was about to get even wilder.
It's crazy, right? Thinking back to using those old Nokia phones with Symbian, felt like they were going to be around forever.
I know, right? It's a good reminder that in the tech world, what's popular today could be ancient history tomorrow.
For sure. But after going through this timeline, it seems like we're kind of in a situation now where it's Android and iOS calling all the shots, wouldn't you say?
They're definitely the big players, that's for sure. But things change so quickly in tech. Who knows what the future holds? Like, look at all the changes that have happened just in the past couple of decades. Wearable tech is becoming huge. There's more and more demand for solutions that put privacy first. And don't even get me started on augmented reality.
It's both exciting and a little overwhelming.
I totally agree.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes, though. I had no idea there was so much history behind those little app icons we see every day.
It's easy to forget there's this whole other world underneath it all.
Exactly. And it's more than just picking a phone. It's like choosing an entire ecosystem, right?
Totally. A whole way of interacting with the digital world.
So with all that in mind, what does the future hold for mobile operating systems?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Any predictions? Any trends we should be watching out for?
Well, for one thing, it seems like the lines between devices are becoming increasingly blurred.
That's true. Like, my phone talks to my smartwatch, which talks to my car. It's pretty wild.
Right. We're moving toward a world where things are way more integrated, with operating systems that connect all our devices into a single, seamless ecosystem.
We're living in the future.
We are. And speaking of the future, we can't forget about artificial intelligence. AI is going to completely change how operating systems work.
It already is.
True. But imagine an OS that learns your habits, knows what you need before you need it, and helps you throughout your day without even having to ask.
That'd be amazing. Although maybe a little creepy, too.
Huh. That's the thing about technological advancements. They always come with both excitement and a bit of healthy skepticism.
That's for sure. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. Really eye-opening stuff.
I agree.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface of the world of mobile operating systems.
There's always more to explore. Who knows, maybe in a few years we'll be back here doing a deep dive on a whole new category of operating systems, ones we haven't even thought of yet.
I'm already looking forward to it.
Me too. Especially with things like augmented and virtual reality becoming more commonplace. Who knows what exciting developments are in store?
It's mind-blowing to even think about. Imagine an OS that can interact with the real world around you, not just a screen.
Now that's a future I want to live in.
Me too. It just goes to show that the world of mobile operating systems is constantly evolving and full of surprises. This has been The Deep Dive, exploring those fascinating stories behind the apps. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.